Northamptonshire police were dispatched at 3:46 p.m. on October 19, 2021, following a routine welfare concern. A female co-worker had reported Marta Kmileka, age 31, missing after 3 consecutive days of silence. No messages, no shift appearances, no activity on her phone. The caller mentioned Marta was reliable to the minute. That was her exact phrase. Officers arrived at a 2-story flat on Wood Street in Kettering, a densely packed neighborhood lined with semi-detached houses and compact flats rented by working-class families and recent immigrants. The front door was locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry, but the smell seeping from the bottom edge of the door was immediate. Familiar to every trained officer, it triggered a silent protocol among them. Gloves came on. They announced their entry once. Then again, no response. The door was breached at 3:59 p.m. Inside, the air was humid, thick, and stagnant. Curtains were drawn. The lights in the hallway had been left on. In the bedroom, a female lay on the mattress, covered to the shoulders. Her skin had discolored. There were visible signs of decomposition. Beside her, facing the opposite direction, was a male subject, unshaven, pale, wearing a blood-stained t-shirt. His wrists were cut, but the wounds were superficial. On the floor was a used knife with a black plastic handle. Kitchen variety. No immediate signs of struggle in the room. When questioned, the man only muttered, "I couldn't leave her." He was later identified as Pavel Chmielewski, age 40. At that moment, he was not under arrest. EMS transported him under medical observation. Officers preserved the scene, secured the property, and contacted the coroner. Initial estimates placed time of death between 3 and 4 days prior. The victim was confirmed to be Marta Chmielewska. Her Polish passport and residence permit were recovered from her handbag in the kitchen. The initial visual assessment showed puncture wounds along the neckline, cheek, and upper torso. There were no signs of restraint or ligature marks. The flat showed no forced access. The back door was secured from the inside. No broken windows. No disarray suggesting a break-in. Detectives from Northamptonshire's Major Crime Unit were called in by 6:15 p.m. The primary question wasn't how Marta had died. It was why no one had known. Neighbors stated they had not heard anything unusual. One tenant in the flat below mentioned the upstairs light had remained on unusually long, but she assumed Marta worked nights. Another neighbor recalled the male occupant walking to the convenience store around the corner 2 nights prior. He bought alcohol, 3 cans. Calm, like nothing was wrong, she said. Inside the flat, officers documented several forensic indicators for analysis. A blanket saturated with blood, concentrated in the cervical and shoulder regions. Smear traces near the doorframe, possibly from contact transfer. A set of partially cleaned kitchen knives in the drying rack, one missing from the block. The heating was turned on, despite it being mild weather. Marta's phone was found under the bed, switched off. The layout of the scene contradicted typical domestic violence patterns. There was no smashed furniture, no scuffle marks. The apartment was organized, if eerily so. The thermostat had been left at 24 Nardier. The fridge contained untouched groceries, 1 loaf of bread, expired milk, and a bottle of vodka, half empty. A working theory developed in the preliminary report. Marta had come to the flat willingly. That was supported by the absence of forced entry and the presence of her handbag, which held both ID and cash. But something had happened. Something fast. Something planned. Detective Inspector Helen Tu, leading the investigation, noted a procedural oddity during the initial walkthrough. He stayed with the body for 4 days, made no call, left the lights on, even cooked noodles. That isn't shock. That's ritual. Toxicology and post-mortem were fast-tracked. Marta's body was transported to Leicester Royal Infirmary that evening. A full forensic autopsy was scheduled for the following morning. Back at the station, a quick scan of public records established the couple's immigration history. They arrived in the UK in 2017 from Siedlce, Poland. They had lived together until early 2020 before reportedly separating. No active restraining orders were found. However, police logs noted a domestic call-out in December 2019. Marta had alleged verbal threats but declined to press charges. This created 2 timelines now running parallel. Marta's independent life post-separation and the unexplained re-entry of Pavel into her last hours. Digital forensics requested immediate analysis of both phones. Data recovery protocols began overnight. Meanwhile, the forensic pathologist's early notes would soon disturb even seasoned staff. The background check confirmed what the flat didn't say. Marta Chmielewska was legally employed, lived alone, and had no criminal record. Her most recent employer described her as punctual, consistent, private. She had worked 6 straight shifts the previous week and requested 2 days off, citing personal business. She never returned. Her digital footprint painted a tight profile. No known aliases, no flagged communications, and no recent travel. Her bank activity showed grocery purchases, 1 haircut appointment, and 2 deposits, wages from a catering company in Wellingborough. No withdrawals had been made in the last 72 hours before her death. Investigators began mapping her timeline by pulling CCTV footage from Marta's known travel routes. A partial image confirmed her walking toward Wood Street at 9:38 p.m. on October 15th. She was alone, carrying a small crossbody bag and dressed in a maroon jacket. Her expression was neutral. The timestamp aligned with the moment her phone last pinged a nearby tower. By all surface measures, she had entered that flat by choice. But that raised a procedural flag. Why return to a location tied to a former relationship, especially if the separation had included past police intervention? To answer that, detectives reviewed historical reports. One entry from late 2019 referenced a domestic disturbance at the same address. Marta had placed the call. She stated she felt verbally threatened. The responding officer noted no physical injuries. She declined to pursue charges and signed a non-cooperation waiver. The case was closed within 48 hours. Still, the officer had left an internal note. Victim appears anxious, avoids eye contact, keeps checking phone. That interaction was one of 3 logged interactions between law enforcement and the couple during their relationship. The others occurred in 2018 and 2020, both involving arguments reported by neighbors. Each time, no charges were filed. After moving out, Marta lived in shared accommodations briefly before leasing her own flat. Interviews with co-workers indicated she had recently regained her footing. She was keeping to herself more. Not sad, just focused, said a co-worker. She mentioned seeing someone new, but only vaguely. That reference led to a second interview. A man named Daniel, age 36, confirmed he had gone on several dates with Marta in September and early October. He described her as cautious but open. He hadn't seen her in the week leading up to her death. Their last message was on the 14th. She had written, "I might need to take care of something, then I'll call you." Her journal, recovered from the top drawer of her nightstand, offered additional insight. Pages were sparse and writing inconsistent, but one entry read, "Closure means risk. I know that, but I need to end things properly." That line aligned with the theory that Marta had arranged to meet someone she trusted. She may have entered the flat voluntarily, possibly to retrieve personal items or finalize unresolved matters. But there was no indication she had alerted anyone to her location or intentions. Detectives began examining whether Marta had been isolated by design. None of her friends knew she planned to return to that residence. She had told no one she was visiting Wood Street. That absence of notice became a focal point in the developing investigation. DI2 flagged one observation. She was moving forward, but her past wasn't done with her. That's not uncommon. The danger isn't always what you left, it's what follows. At this point in the inquiry, the timeline was tightening. What began as a missing persons case had now become a layered homicide inquiry with possible coercive control elements. The motive wasn't obvious. The violence was excessive. The lack of alert behavior from the victim raised questions. Why return? Why alone? Why silence? The digital forensics unit was ordered to begin full extraction from both Marta's and the male occupant's mobile devices. The team was also instructed to pull data from the property's smart meter. Investigators wanted to know when the heating was activated, what time lights were turned on, and when the power usage spiked. They weren't just tracking events, they were reconstructing intent. The postmortem began at 9 a.m., October 20th at Leicester Royal Infirmary. The examination was assigned to Dr. Marion Leavitt, a senior forensic pathologist with experience in over 600 homicide cases. This one was labeled high priority. The body had been in a temperature-controlled morgue for less than 12 hours. Marta Chmieleka's body arrived in a sealed, labeled transport bag, chain of custody intact. Photographic documentation preceded any incisions. Visual inspection revealed 32 sharp force injuries, concentrated across the neck, jawline, clavicle, and upper chest. 17 wounds were consistent with a single-blade instrument, 10 to 14 centimeters in length, likely a kitchen knife. Depth varied from superficial slices to deep, angled penetrations through muscle tissue. 5 of the wounds had partially intersected, suggesting rapid successive strikes. No defensive wounds were present on the forearms, no signs of restraint, no ligature marks on the wrists, no bruising on the ankles, and no petechiae in the eyes or face to suggest strangulation. Toxicology screening was negative for alcohol, benzodiazepines, opioids, or sedatives. She was fully conscious at the time of the attack. Cause of death was listed as exsanguination due to multiple stab wounds to the neck and upper thorax. Time of death estimated between 10:15 and 11:30 p.m. on October 15th. Autopsy notes included one anomaly. Despite the high number of stab wounds, no signs of prolonged struggle were present on the rest of her body. No bruises from being pushed, no torn fingernails, no hair fragments under the nails. That prompted one conclusion: she either didn't fight or couldn't. A swab of Marta's right hand revealed epithelial transfer consistent with contact, possibly holding on to the assailant or coming into contact with them moments before death. No skin fragments were found under the nails. Blood pattern analysis of the clothing revealed a saturation pattern along the right sleeve, down to the cuff. Marta may have raised her arm as a reflexive barrier at the time of initial impact. The pathologist also documented the body temperature at intake, 28.2 Anish. That, combined with ambient conditions at the flat and the degree of early decomposition, further supported a death window consistent with Friday night. It also aligned with energy use spikes from the smart meter data, a spike at 10:22 p.m., likely from the heating system, and another at 10:49 p.m., possibly consistent with the washer briefly running. Investigators now had a more complete window. Marta had walked into that flat alive around 9:40 p.m. and was dead within an hour. A DNA analyst began processing blood samples from the wall and floor. A mixture of 2 profiles was expected, Marta's and one from the male found on scene. Results would be confirmed in 48 to 72 hours. Investigators also processed the black-handled kitchen knife found near the bed. It carried visible blood, and initial swabs indicated both DNA and latent prints. Those were prioritized for expedited analysis. The bedroom mattress had been partially stripped. The sheet covering Marta had absorbed most of the blood. It had not been replaced. One pillow was missing its case. Police recovered that case in the laundry hamper, blood-soaked and partially rinsed. A forensic chemist would later confirm attempts had been made to clean it, using only cold water. There were no signs of transportation or movement of the body after death. Marta had died where she was found. Back at the Northamptonshire Major Crime Unit, D.I. Helen II reviewed the forensic report alongside the early interview transcripts. The suspect, still under hospital watch, claimed Marta arrived to talk. He reported that they had dinner. He described her mood as normal. When asked why he hadn't contacted police after her death, his response was, "I didn't know what to do." It was procedural, but hollow. What the forensics indicated was not panic. It was order. Lighting remained on. Food remained in place. No contents from the fridge had been consumed. The only items used in those 4 days were alcohol, one set of clothes, and a blanket, used to cover her body, not to preserve warmth. That distinction mattered. Detectives noted another inconsistency. In a digital search of the suspect's phone, browser history showed an entry from 3:12 a.m. on October 16th. How long does it take a body to smell? Intent wasn't only in action. Sometimes it was in the delay. In towns like Kettering, crimes like this don't fade quietly. They fracture families. They ripple through immigrant communities, trying to live unnoticed. Marta's death didn't just reveal the end of a relationship. It revealed how quietly threats can persist after they've gone unreported. No bruises, no protection orders, no alarm bells. Just silence, then escalation. Law enforcement flagged the case for media coordination. A press release was drafted, stating the police were investigating a suspicious death and encouraging anyone with knowledge of Marta's movements on the evening of October 15th to come forward. Behind closed doors, the team had already shifted focus. They weren't just building a homicide case. They were tracing behavioral patterns, looking backward, not just at the scene, but at the system that let it reach this point unnoticed. The digital forensics team began their extraction at 7:32 on October 21st. Both devices, Marta's Android and the suspect's older Samsung model, had been secured in evidence bags immediately following the scene response. Neither were encrypted, which expedited access. But what mattered was no longer what the phone showed, it was what they didn't. Marta's device, though switched off at recovery, retained a full SIM record. Her last outgoing message had been sent at 8:56 p.m. on October 15th. It was to a contact labeled Daniel. "I'll text you tomorrow if I'm back early." She never followed up. The phone's location history, pulled from Google activity logs, placed her at her apartment until 9:14 p.m., then en route through Highfield Road, and arriving at the Wood Street flat by 9:39 p.m. After that, the device remained stationary. No movement, no data transmission. At 10:03 p.m., her signal cut off. Battery wasn't the issue. It had been manually powered down. Her search history showed no signs of fear, distress, or contingency planning. The final entries included Polish bakery near Kettering and Cheap Curtains, UK. That data didn't align with someone entering a confrontation. The other phone, retrieved from the male individual found in the flat, provided contrast. His device remained active throughout the weekend. Battery recharged twice. The browser history included 2 flagged queries. How to get rid of smell after death, 03:12 a.m., October 16th. How long before body is found if door is locked, 12:26 a.m., October 17th. The search terms weren't phrased hypothetically. They read like someone already in the aftermath. Deleted messages were recovered through system cache. On the night of October 15th, he had texted Marta at 7:22 p.m. "Come get your stuff and let's talk like adults." No response was recorded. Internal timestamps confirmed he had accessed Marta's phone briefly, around 10:47 p.m., using a swipe pattern. It was unclear how he obtained it, but forensics noted 3 fingerprint matches along the lower edge of her device consistent with his right thumb. The usage window was short. He didn't message anyone from her phone, but data logs showed he opened her messaging app and deleted 2 threads. Both were recovered. One with Daniel, light exchanges, no threats, but signs of growing closeness. One unnamed number with a contact she had called Agnieszka. The last entry from Marta had said, "If I don't come back, it's at Wood Street." That message was never sent. It sat in drafts. The suspect's app usage revealed further irregularities. On October 16th, he opened his calculator app 23 times in 1 hour. Forensic psychology flagged that as a possible compulsive action, sometimes observed in individuals attempting to self-regulate stress. More significant was his activity on a note-taking app. A deleted entry, time-stamped October 16th, 1:56 a.m., read, "It's done. I didn't plan it, but maybe this is how it had to end." This entry had been deleted within 3 minutes of being written. A forensic linguist assessed the phrasing: passive voice, no mention of the victim's name, distancing language. It aligned with someone trying to psychologically detach from the act. Smart meter logs, subpoenaed the same day, placed a final detail. A spike in water usage occurred between 11:18 p.m. and 11:42 p.m. on the 15th, consistent with showering or possibly rinsing fabric. That timestamp fit neatly after the forensic estimate of Marta's time of death. The data narrowed the sequence to under 90 minutes. Arrival, interaction, fatal assault, digital tampering, cleanup. Investigators compiled the digital evidence into a timeline overlay. It matched the autopsy. It matched energy use. It matched behavioral profiles. But what it exposed most clearly was intent. It wasn't just what happened. It was the absence of panic, the suppression of outgoing messages, the deletions, the waiting, the research. Each digital act extended the harm beyond the room, delaying discovery, erasing Marta's voice, and rewriting how the story would be found. Cases like these test how closely we watch patterns, especially digital ones. They reveal how modern violence doesn't always scream. It hides in app data, drafts, deleted items no one thought to check. Marta's phone was re-imaged. Investigators preserved it fully. It wasn't evidence, it was testimony. The forensic data made the timeline sharper. But timelines alone don't explain motive. They're evidence of when. What investigators needed next was why, and why now. The domestic abuse risk assessment flagged a prior police response at the same Wood Street address. It dated back to December 2019. Marta had called from a neighbor's phone. She said she didn't feel safe, but when officers arrived, she minimized the situation. No injuries, no visible damage, no formal complaint. The report was closed within 72 hours, but the original officer's body cam file told a different story. Marta opened the door with her coat already on. She looked over her shoulder twice during the first 30 seconds of contact. Her voice was low. Her answers clipped. At one point, she said, "He hasn't touched me today." There were no criminal charges from that incident and no follow-up requests from Marta. By process standards, nothing more could be done. In the UK, coercive control became a criminal offense in 2015, but in practice it relies on patterns, and patterns rarely show in a single call. That's what made these cases fragile. They didn't break at once. They eroded slowly. A review of police logs revealed two additional events, one in 2018, one in early 2020. Both logged as verbal dispute. Both resolved without further action. Neither mentioned physical violence. But the reporting officer in 2020 had noted that Pavel refused to leave the premises and made dismissive comments toward officers. Investigators contacted Marta's former roommates from her interim housing in 2020. One of them, a woman named Sylvia, confirmed Marta moved out after ending her relationship. She was private, she said, but she told me he used to text her even when she changed her number. Sometimes she'd come home and say, "I saw him again, outside the building." Sylvia said Marta never documented it. She said she didn't want drama. She just wanted him to stop. And it's hard to report someone just for being nearby. Another witness, a co-worker from Marta's previous job in Corby, remembered Marta receiving messages that made her tense. She'd stop talking mid-sentence, read something on her phone, and change mood completely. Once she even left early. That incident was logged in her HR file as a personal emergency. Nothing escalated. No formal workplace report was filed. This was the consistent profile. Subtle but persistent stressors. Isolation without direct violence. No bruises, no photos, nothing to build a case on until now. A behavioral analyst was brought in to conduct a psychological autopsy, not just on the crime, but on the relationship. Based on witness interviews, digital records, and prior law enforcement contacts, the profile showed signs of dependency followed by retaliation. Marta had established distance. She had moved out, changed jobs, initiated a new relationship. The re-entry point wasn't sudden. It followed a gradual pattern of reconnection masked as resolution. It's a known dynamic in domestic violence cases. The most dangerous time is after a survivor leaves, not during the abuse, but in the months that follow when the abuser loses control. A note recovered from Marta's journal, dated 10 days before her death, supported this. It read, "I know he'll twist it, but I want it done. No ties, no guilt." It wasn't a cry for help. It was a statement of intent. She was closing the door. The problem is, when a person has spent years controlling someone's life, their greatest fear is losing narrative control. That fear can turn into violence, and sometimes the system only connects the dots when it's already too late. The suspect was declared medically stable by the end of October 21st. He was moved from hospital observation to custody under watch. No psychiatric detainment was ordered. No self-harm precautions were requested beyond standard holding. Police processed the booking, and the interview was scheduled the following morning under PACE, Police and Criminal Evidence Act guidelines. During his initial session, he declined legal representation. He was read his rights. The first answer he gave was that Marta had arrived late, and they had talked like normal. His tone was flat. When asked why he hadn't reported her death, he replied, "I didn't know what to do." He offered no further elaboration. Every follow-up about timelines, movements, or his phone searches was met with a version of, "I can't remember." Detectives paused the interview and re-entered after reviewing the structured timeline. Marta's arrival at 9:39 p.m., her phone going offline at 10:03 p.m., smart meter spikes, device access, deletion logs, and the knife with both DNA samples. These weren't suggestions. They were matched physical events. When confronted with the 3:12 a.m. search, how to get rid of smell after death, he said he was curious. When asked about the deleted note from his phone, he claimed, "I write things sometimes. Doesn't mean anything." The interview was extended for one more session. In that round, investigators brought up Marta's final draft message, the one never sent, recovered from her unsent folder. It had been time-stamped and matched to a moment just before her phone was shut down. She had been trying to text a friend, "If I don't come back, it's at Wood Street." He did not respond to that line. Instead, he requested a break. There was no confession. What investigators documented was not a breakdown. It was containment, flat answers, avoidance, and a refusal to acknowledge physical evidence that had no alternate explanation. Silence became the most consistent feature of his testimony. From a prosecutorial perspective, the lack of admission didn't weaken the case. The forensic chain was already intact. Time of death, presence of the weapon, deleted messages, his digital trail, and the fact that he stayed with the body for 4 days without contacting anyone. His own search terms alone indicated a consciousness of death and a concern for concealment, not shock. In cases of domestic homicide, post-incident behavior often says more than the act itself. Panic leaves traces. This wasn't panic. This was avoidance strategy. Control extended beyond the victim's death into how, when, and if the crime would be discovered. When asked one last time, "Did you harm Marta?" his answer was a pause followed by, "She could have left, but she didn't leave. Not that night. She tried to once." The police records, the witness testimony, the behavior logs, they all showed that. But there was no formal protection in place. No restraining order, no safety alert. She had tried to manage risk on her own terms. And for 4 days, her body had been in the same bed where she died, while he searched how long it would take for someone to notice. He was charged with murder that evening. The trial commenced on September 4, 2023 at Northampton Crown Court. Jury selection was finalized in less than a day. The charge, murder under common law with intent. The prosecution opened with a concise assertion: the defendant had knowingly and deliberately killed Marta Chmielewska in a private residence, made no attempt to seek help, and took steps to delay discovery. They would rely on physical, digital, and behavioral evidence. No confession would be presented because none had been offered. The timeline was central. The prosecution reconstructed Marta's final hours with precision: surveillance footage, phone records, energy usage, device access. Each layer confirmed she arrived at the Wood Street flat alive and never exited. Her mobile phone signal cut at 10:03 p.m. Data confirmed she never turned it on again. The last person to access it was not her. The forensic pathologist took the stand on day 2. Dr. Marion Levitt outlined the 32 stab wounds, specifying 5 that were deep, targeted, and medically unsurvivable. The neck wounds had penetrated vascular tissue. Marta had bled to death within minutes. No defensive injuries were found. She did not struggle. The prosecution framed this fact carefully. It wasn't submission, it was surprise. Next came the forensic digital analyst. He presented a side-by-side display of both phones. Marta stopped transmitting after 10:03 p.m. The defendant's remained active. His Google search history was projected for the court. How to get rid of smell after death. How long before a body is found if door is locked? And a now deleted note: "It's done. I didn't plan it, but maybe this is how it had to end." The prosecution did not exaggerate this point. They explained it as conscious behavior occurring after the homicide, not in panic, but in preparation. Witness testimony supported the emotional timeline. A former roommate, a co-worker, and Marta's close friend all stated she had tried to separate herself from the relationship for over a year. She had blocked numbers, changed jobs, relocated. What she hadn't done legally was file for protection. There had never been a restraining order. That absence, while legally irrelevant to guilt, was meaningful to context. The defense offered no alternative suspect. Their strategy was diminished intent. They claimed the defendant lost control during an emotional confrontation and did not premeditate the murder. They pointed to the lack of prior violent convictions and the defendant's refusal to flee or destroy physical evidence. That argument was neutralized by the timeline. 4 days with the body, no 999 call, and documented attempts to understand decomposition. Mid-trial, the court heard from law enforcement. DI Helen II recounted the initial discovery. The suspect lying in bed beside Marta's decomposing body, the thermostat still set high, and no signs of an attempted cleanup, only partial washing of a pillowcase and the knife left drying. In cross-examination, the defense questioned whether Marta's return to the flat implied some form of reconciliation. The prosecutor answered during summation, "Trusting someone enough to retrieve your belongings is not consent to be killed." The jury received final instructions on September 14th. The verdict returned the following day, guilty of murder. At sentencing, the judge described the act as a killing rooted not in rage, but in control, an attempt to erase someone who had reclaimed her independence. The sentence, life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 18 years and 4 months. No appeal was filed. The courtroom emptied without disruption. There were no press conferences, no protests, no spectacle. But in the gallery, Marta's father remained seated long after the proceedings ended. He had flown in from Poland. Through an interpreter, he said only that his daughter had once dreamed of becoming a nurse, and he hoped she would now be remembered not for how she died, but for the quiet dignity of how she lived. The trial concluded without disruption. No appeal was filed. The defendant began serving his sentence in October 2023. The court transcripts were sealed without controversy. To the justice system, the case was closed. But outside courtroom walls, few noticed. There was no public vigil, no formal statement from any advocacy group. Marta's name wasn't added to any official watch list of domestic abuse victims because she had never been formally registered as one. She had never filed a protection order, never accessed a shelter, never made a recorded accusation beyond the vague phrase, "He hasn't touched me today." That was all. At the national level, the case didn't spark legal reform. It didn't trend. No member of parliament cited it during debates on coercive control legislation, and in the community where she lived, most neighbors admitted, after the fact, that they barely knew her. Within the Northamptonshire Constabulary, however, the case left a different mark. A post-investigation review led to internal revisions in how reports of nonviolent domestic incidents were archived. New training modules were introduced, ones that focused not on injuries but on patterns, unwanted contact, isolation behaviors, and subtle escalation. Detective Inspector Helen II submitted a closing brief outside protocol. In it, she wrote, "This wasn't a sudden act of violence. It was a long-term failure of proximity, and that's harder to see because we are not trained to fear what's familiar." The details of the case remained intact. 32 stab wounds, 4 days of concealment, search histories that replaced remorse with delay tactics. But no forensic detail could answer a question still unresolved. Why did Marta go back? There was no romantic reconciliation, no note left behind, no witness who heard a raised voice. All that remained was a moment, a routine decision to retrieve something, to finalize unfinished business. That moment became fatal, not because Marta underestimated risk, but because the system underestimated how risk behaves without bruises. In her bedroom drawer, investigators had found a folder. Inside was a printed application form for a community health college. Marta had filled out most of it, left the emergency contact line blank, and tucked it beneath a receipt for printer ink. The application was dated 3 weeks before her death. That folder was never presented in court. It wasn't legally relevant, but it was factually true, and sometimes the things that never make the record carry the weight no verdict can hold. Marta Chmielewska had no criminal record. She caused no harm. She filed no charges. She asked for no media attention. She simply tried to rebuild her life. Her story does not need to be sensationalized. It needs to be remembered, because the next woman who walks into a quiet flat to talk like adults might not have time to text a friend. And if she doesn't come back, we need to be better at recognizing that silence is not peace. Sometimes what kills a person isn't sudden rage. It's the silence that built up around them for years. As someone who spent time uncovering stories like Marta's, I've learned this. Control doesn't always look like violence. It often looks like routine, like checking in, like someone always knowing where you are. And if you've ever felt something wasn't right, but no one believed you because there were no bruises, then you know exactly what I mean. So I want to leave you with this. Trust your instincts. Speak up even if your voice shakes. And if someone around you is pulling away quietly, don't assume they're okay. Check in with intention. If this story spoke to you, leave a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from or what part of this hit home. And if it didn't resonate, I still want to hear why. What did we miss? If you made it this far, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps bring light to stories that deserve to be told. Don't just scroll, connect.